Imagine that you are a wolf, running free through the forest, feeling the cold wind on your face and hearing the soft sound of leaves under your paws. Freedom is all you know. But suddenly, your stomach begins to ache with hunger. It's been days since you found food, and with each step, the fatigue grows. Then, amidst the trees, you see something unexpected, a fat, well-fed dog with shiny fur and a calm expression. He seems to have everything he needs. Curious, you approach and discover his secret. The dog has an owner who feeds, cares for, and shelters him. But there's a price. He lives chained, without the freedom to run wherever he wants. And now? What would you choose? Freedom, even with hunger, or comfort in exchange for living in captivity? If you want to find out more about this incredible story and learn what the wolf decided, subscribe to our channel now. Let's explore together the tough choices that can change everything. Don't miss out on any content and be a part of this journey. It was a cold afternoon in the forest, and the winds cut like knives through the hungry wolf wandering aimlessly. His tired eyes scanned the surroundings in search of something, anything, that could serve as food. His muscles were no longer as agile, and his ribs stood out under his stretched skin, making it clear that he hadn't eaten in days. Snow covered the ground, making hunting even more difficult, and the wolf was on the verge of exhaustion. Just when he thought he couldn't take it any longer, something unexpected appeared among the trees. It wasn't the prey he had been searching for, but rather another animal. The wolf stopped abruptly and hid behind a fallen log, watching cautiously. A few meters away, he saw a dog. But not just any dog. This was a large animal with thick, shiny fur that reflected the faint sunlight. The contrast was striking. The dog was twice the size of the wolf and had a visibly full belly. The wolf rubbed his eyes, thinking that maybe he was seeing a mirage caused by hunger. But no, the dog was indeed there, calmly chewing what appeared to be the remains of a feast. The scene was almost comical. The fat dog, completely oblivious to the harsh environment of the forest, gnawed at bones and licked his lips with evident satisfaction. "Hey," said the wolf, stepping out of his hiding place and cautiously approaching. "Where did you come from? How can you be so well-fed while the rest of us are starving?" The dog lifted his head, surprised by the approach but showing no sign of fear. He wagged his tail, a friendly gesture, and smiled at the wolf. "Oh, my dear friend, you're right. I am very well fed. I have food every day at the right time, and I don't even have to hunt for it," replied the dog proudly. The wolf, still suspicious, took a few steps forward, keeping a certain distance. "You don't have to hunt? What do you mean? Aren't you a wild dog like me?" asked the wolf, incredulous. The dog laughed, as if finding the misunderstanding amusing. "Wild? Oh no. I have an owner. I live in a comfortable house, sleep in a warm and soft place every night. My only task is to protect the house and bark at strangers. In return, my owner gives me food in abundance. Just look at me," he said, turning around to show his robust form. "Easy life, don't you think?" The wolf looked at the dog with a mix of envy and confusion. He couldn't imagine a life without freedom, without the thrill of the hunt, but he also couldn't deny that the hunger was eating away at him. His eyes fixed on the dog's full belly, and for a brief moment, he considered what it would be like to live like that animal, without having to fight every day for survival. "It does seem like an easy life, yes," said the wolf in a low voice, pondering the situation. "But what about freedom? Don't you ever go out to run freely through the forest? Don't you miss that?" The dog scratched his ear with his hind leg, as if the question was hard to answer. "Well, I don't run that much, to be honest," the dog replied with a restrained laugh. "I'm almost always inside the yard of the house. Sometimes I go for a walk with my owner. But who needs to run through the forest when you have everything you need at hand? Freedom can be overrated, you know? What's important is to have comfort and food. I don't mind staying limited to the yard as long as I have a good and secure life." The wolf remained silent, his ears lowering slightly. He looked around at the snow-covered trees and the cloudy sky, feeling the cold wind on his thin skin. That safe and well-fed life seemed tempting. His muscles ached from the constant struggle to find food, and his bones seemed to protest with every step. But at the same time, the thought of being chained, of no longer being able to run freely through the forest, filled him with unease. "I don't know," murmured the wolf. "I've been hungry, I've run until my paws bled, but I've never been chained, never had to live under anyone's control. I can't imagine trading that for a life of comfort, but without freedom." The dog shrugged. "Each to their own choices, my friend. For me, Safety and food are worth more than running around aimlessly. But I understand that for you, freedom has its value. Everyone has their priorities. The two stayed silent for a few moments, the wolf contemplating the life the dog led, and the dog observing the wolf's internal struggle. In the end, the wolf gave the well-fed dog one last glance, turned, and returned to the forest, still hungry but with his freedom intact. "Good luck, friend," said the dog, before returning to his meal. And so, each went their way, seeking what they valued most. For the dog, comfort and safety. For the wolf, freedom, even with all its challenges. The wolf, after hearing the dog's brief explanation about his easy life, couldn't help but wonder, how can something so good, like food and comfort, be offered without some kind of sacrifice? So he decided to delve deeper into the conversation, feeling there was something left unsaid. "But tell me, dog," the wolf began cautiously, sitting down on the cold forest floor. "If your life is so perfect, why don't you run around? Why have I never seen you in the forest before? You must have everything you want, food, a warm place to sleep. So why are you always so close to the house?" The dog hesitated for a second, as if reflecting on how to answer that question. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words. Finally, after a brief sigh, he said, "Well, there is a small condition for this wonderful life. It's nothing major, I'd say." The dog tried to smile, but the wolf noticed there was discomfort in his words. "My owner likes to make sure I'm always around to protect him. So most of the time I am chained." "Chained?" repeated the wolf, surprised. He had never imagined that. The word sounded heavy, like a weight that sent a shiver down his spine. "You can't go wherever you want?" The dog shook his head, as if trying to minimize the impact of his own words. "Look, it's not as bad as it sounds," he said, with a slightly defensive tone. "The chain is long enough for me to walk around the yard, and my owner lets me loose sometimes so I can run a bit. Besides, the food is plentiful. I never go hungry, unlike you, who spends days and days without finding a decent meal." The wolf frowned, feeling the weight of the dog's words. Chained. It sounded like a prison, even though the dog tried to paint a more optimistic picture. He remembered the hard days, the failed hunts, and the nights without food. Yet, the idea of being free, even if it was a freedom filled with uncertainties and dangers, was something he valued above all else. "So you're telling me that to have all this food and comfort, you have to live imprisoned?" asked the wolf, with a more serious tone. "Don't you miss the freedom to run wherever you want, to hunt, or simply wander aimlessly?" The dog shrugged, with an expression that mixed resignation and acceptance. "Maybe I missed it at first," the dog replied, with a slight tone of nostalgia in his voice. "When I was younger, I ran everywhere, free as the wind. But over time, I realized that the wild life has its downsides. The hunger, the cold, the constant need to fight to survive. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. Living chained isn't so bad when you have everything you need." The wolf looked intently at the dog, trying to understand his perspective. He could see that the dog truly believed in what he was saying, that somehow he had accepted that the sacrifice of his freedom was worth the comfort he received in return. The wolf, however, couldn't help but feel a deep discomfort with that idea. For him, the thought of being chained, of not being able to do what he wanted, when he wanted, was unimaginable. "But, what if one day you want to go further?" asked the wolf, with a curious look. "What if you get tired of always being in the same place, with the same routine? Aren't you afraid of losing what it means to be free?" The dog sighed, as if he had already thought about that possibility but had pushed the idea away. "Maybe," said the dog, looking toward the horizon, as if reflecting on a life he had left behind. "But the truth is, I got used to it. The chain is like an old friend now. It reminds me that, although I can't go wherever I want, I am safe, well-fed, and cared for. I don't know if I'd be willing to risk that for a freedom full of uncertainties." The wolf remained silent, processing the dog's words. On the one hand, he understood that the dog had made a choice, to trade freedom for safety. But on the other hand, he knew that this wasn't a trade he, the wolf, would be willing to make. The price seemed too high. "So that's it?" asked the wolf, finally breaking the silence. "You live chained in exchange for food and shelter?" The dog nodded, without hesitation. "Yes. And honestly, I think many would do the same if they knew how hard it is to survive alone. In the wild, you are your only support. With an owner, you always know there's someone to take care of you. I think everyone needs to decide what they value more, freedom or safety." The wolf looked one last time at the dog, trying to imagine himself in that situation, tied to a chain, unable to run freely through the mountains and valleys he loved so much. He turned, ready to leave. "That may work for you, dog, but for me, freedom is all I have," said the wolf, starting to walk back into the forest. "I prefer hunger and uncertainty over the security of a chain." The dog watched the wolf walk away, respecting his choice, even though he didn't fully understand it. For the dog, a life in chains was enough. But the wolf knew his soul could never endure living in captivity, no matter how comfortable the cage was. As the wolf walked back into the forest, the dog's words still echoed in his mind. He knew that the dog's life was, indeed, comfortable. He imagined the dog sleeping in a warm bed, with food at his paws, without the constant weight of hunger, thirst, or fear. The idea of having all of that, without needing to fight for survival every day, was tempting. But then, as if each step in the snow brought him back to reality, he remembered the price: living chained. He walked for a while, his thoughts racing as fast as his paws in the snow. The cold wind cut through his thin skin, but he was used to it. Since he was young, freedom was all he had known. Even as a pup, his parents had taught him that living in the forest meant being free, but it also meant that survival would never be easy. He remembered one specific night, when he was young, and the wolves in his pack had hunted for hours without success. The intense cold made many give up and return to their dens, but he refused. The need to eat, the drive to keep running, always pushed him forward. That night, while wandering alone, he finally managed to catch a rabbit. The small prey wasn't enough to feed everyone, but the feeling of victory, of having secured his own survival, was incomparable. Now, after his encounter with the dog, he wondered if all that effort was really worth it. The dog lived comfortably, without worrying about the next day. He didn't hunt, didn't suffer from the cold or hunger. But was that life of comfort, of dependence, something he truly wanted? Deep down, the wolf knew the answer. He didn't need much time to reflect. The dog's life might seem easy, but it wasn't the life of a wolf. It wasn't the life he had learned to value. While the dog was content being controlled, chained, and submissive, the wolf valued every second of his freedom, even if that freedom came with pain and sacrifices. He stopped for a moment beside a frozen river, where the wind blew harder, and the tree branches danced around him. Nature was alive, wild, and unpredictable, just like him. The wolf lay down in the snow, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the wind caress his face. He knew that despite all the difficulties, nothing would ever replace the feeling of running freely through the forest, smelling the earth, and hearing the sounds of the animals around him. Comfort, the wolf murmured to himself, as if testing the word. It's not worth the chain. At that moment, a fox approached, drawn by the lone figure of the wolf. She observed him curiously, her sharp gaze trying to understand what the wolf was thinking. "You're quiet today, wolf," said the fox, her thin voice cutting through the surrounding silence. "What happened? You seem to have found something more disturbing than hunger." The wolf slowly opened his eyes, noticing the fox's presence. He didn't know her well, but he had seen her many times in the forest. She was clever, always managing to escape dangerous situations with her wit. "I met a dog," said the wolf, without preamble. "A fat, well-fed dog. He lives with his owner, who gives him food and shelter, but he is chained. He can't run freely through the forest like us." The fox tilted her head, surprised. "And he's happy with that?" she asked, frowning. "Apparently, yes. He gets food every day, a warm place to sleep. In return, he lives chained, watching over his owner's house. He said he prefers that to the freedom and uncertainty of wild life," replied the wolf, still trying to understand how someone could accept living like that. The fox sat beside the wolf, staring at the frozen river ahead. "I've seen dogs like that," she said thoughtfully. "They may seem happy, but there's always a part of them that longs for something more. Freedom is something we can't replace. I've thought before about what it would be like to live more safely, without worrying about the next meal. But the idea of being chained, that would be unbearable." The wolf nodded. Even without saying it out loud, he knew the fox was right. The chain wasn't just physical, it represented the loss of something much deeper, the ability to choose, to be master of oneself. "And you, wolf?" asked the fox, turning to him with a curious look. "If you could choose, would you trade your freedom for a comfortable life like the dogs?" The wolf laughed, a rough and dry sound that echoed through the forest. "No, fox. I would never trade my freedom. The life I have, with all its difficulties, is the only one I know. I'd rather go hungry, run until my paws bleed, but remain free. That's the true value of wild life. Freedom can be harsh, but it's what makes us who we are." The fox smiled and looked back at the horizon. "I agree. Freedom has a price, but it's a price worth paying." The two remained silent, contemplating the forest around them. The wind continued to blow, carrying with it the smell of the earth and the distant sounds of other animals. The wild, with all its uncertainties, was alive in every corner of that place. The wolf stood up and looked at the fox, now resolute. "I think I'll continue my search for food," he said. "I'd rather go through another day of hunger, but keep being free." The fox nodded, perfectly understanding what he meant. "Good luck, wolf. May the winds guide you and the prey find you." And so the wolf continued walking through the forest, his paws leaving marks in the soft snow. The dog, with all his safety and comfort, was no longer a temptation for him. The wolf knew that, for him, freedom was priceless. Even though it was difficult, it was the life he had chosen, and he would never trade that for a chain. After leaving the dog behind, the wolf went on his way through the forest. As he walked, he reflected on the encounter. He thought about the contrast between their lives, the dog with all his comfort, but chained, and himself, free but hungry. It was a difficult choice, one that many might prefer not to make. The wolf knew that hunger was wearing down his strength, and that the dog would never have to endure that. However, he also knew that the chain wasn't just physical, it was a symbol of something bigger, a prison that took away the ability to truly be free. Life, after all, was made of choices. The dog had chosen security, easy food, in exchange for freedom. The wolf, on the other hand, wasn't willing to sacrifice his wild soul for a full plate of food. He preferred to face the unknown, run through the fields, hunt his own meal, and most importantly, feel the wind of freedom on his face. That was his essence, his nature, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. At that moment, the wolf understood that the true wealth of life wasn't in comfort, but in the freedom to live on his own terms. And although it was a tough choice, he knew which path to take. So, what did you think of the story? In the end, the wolf made his choice, preferring freedom, even with all the challenges and difficulties it brings. He knew that living in captivity, no matter how comfortable, wasn't what he wanted for his life. And that's a lesson for all of us. Sometimes, what seems easy and safe can trap us in ways we don't even realize. So stay tuned. The next time you have to choose between the easy path and the free path, think carefully. Safety may be appealing, but is it worth giving up your freedom? Keep your eyes open, because the choices we make always come with a price. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this one. And remember, you are the master of your decisions. See you next time.